I lost at truth or dare. And my boyfriend kissed his first love. A group of people were laughing at me. When it was my turn, I pointed at the campus heartthrob and said, "So it's a kiss. I choose him." He smiled, flicked away his cigarette butt, and pulled me into his arms, saying, "Didn't you say you were going to kiss me? Why do I have to take the initiative? I just came to the terrace to get some air." Before I could push open the terrace door, I heard a woman's soft whispers. Coquetess and acting coquettously in an unoccupied corner. My boyfriend was holding a woman in a black dress in his arms. I knew this woman. She was his first love, with whom he had been in a relationship for 3 years. Today is Blaze's birthday. She came uninvited and even brought the campus heartthrob. I could tell that Blaze was uncomfortable. He asked her in a cold voice, "Why are you here?" Ivory glanced at me, smiled gently, as if coaxing a pouting child, and said, "I've said that I won't miss any of your birthdays." With a heavy feeling on my shoulder, Blaze hugged me into his arms, looked down at her, and said, "Thanks. But I don't need it anymore." Now. They were pressed closely together, kissing passionately. I could even hear the intimate sound of their lips in the air. I suddenly remembered that on the day Blaze confessed to me, we were also hugging. He lowered his head to kiss me at that time, but I turned my face away and refused. He gave a dry laugh and said, "Celeste, I can wait for you." So this was what he meant by waiting for me. "Aren't you coming in?" Someone quietly approached me from behind, and I smelled a pleasant scent of snow pine. I turned my head and found that the campus heartthrob, Noctis, was standing behind me, leisurely smoking. His expression was neither sad nor happy, and there was no sign of disappointment from being betrayed. As expected of the campus heartthrob, he really remained calm even in the face of great danger. I pointed inside and asked curiously, "Don't you mind?" "Mind what?" He raised his eyebrows, looking puzzled. I shook my head and said, "It's nothing. I'm going down." As I left, I heard Ivory ask Blaze in a sobbing voice, "Is she your way of getting back at me?" I didn't want to know what Blaze would say. Really, having fulfilled my session. It was so boring. When Blaze came back, Ivory followed behind him with red-rimmed eyes. Someone who had drunk too much waved at them and shouted with a laugh, "Sis." The last word was held back, and he changed it to, "Sister Ivory." After that, he looked at me uneasily. The sofa sank again as Blaze sat on my left side, raising his right hand to rest on the back of the sofa. This action seemed like he was going to hug me into his arms. I felt even more uncomfortable, sitting up straight with my back rigid, not wanting any physical contact with him. "Don't just drink. It's so dull. Let's do something fun," someone suggested. "What should we play?" Someone echoed, "King's Game?" No way. They glanced at Noctis. And no one dared to play this game with him. "Let's play Truth or Dare," someone decided. So cliché. Despite saying this, they still started playing. The wine bottle spun on the table, turning half a circle and stopping in front of Ivory. She gave a generous smile, slightly complaining, and looked at several people coquettously, saying familiarly, "I think you just want to make fun of me." Although she said so, she wasn't angry. She casually drew a card, froze, her fingers gripping the card tightly, and the smile froze on her face. "What is it?" The boy sitting opposite Ivory stood up, took the punishment card from her hand, and his smile also froze on his face. He said, "Oh no, no. This one isn't good. Change it. Draw another one." Others were also agreeing. Ivory raised her hand. Just as her delicate hand was about to reach the card-drawing box, she heard Noctis, who was leaning on the sofa, half smiling. He raised his head, his eyes fixed on the stunned Ivory, and said lazily, "What's the point of redrawing? Are you afraid to play?" The atmosphere froze. But then Noctis stopped talking. Ivory stood up, took back the card, and said, "Oh, what's so bad about redrawing? It's just a game. I'm not afraid to play." She read out the punishment on the card. "Kiss the second male-looking person on your left." The second male-looking person on her left was exactly Blaze. I looked at Blaze. He had been looking at Ivory and didn't notice me at all. Funny enough, Ivory had been looking at Noctis, as if waiting for his reaction. Noctis didn't show much reaction. Blaze took my hand, trying to smooth things over. Come on. Let's just have a drink. My girlfriend is right here. I sneered silently and pulled my hand away. Blaze was taken aback and asked me, "What's wrong?" I had always been obedient and had never refuted his face like this before. Ivory looked at me with a smile and said, "Sorry, sister. I'll borrow your boyfriend for a moment." I found it a bit funny, looking at her complacent and Tom-and-shaped eyes, slightly raised, as if showing off her victory. I smiled, acting even more generous than her, and said meaningfully, "Don't be so polite. It's not like you to have never kissed before." Celeste. Blaze looked at me, slightly stunned. But it was clear to everyone which one of Ivory and me was more important to him. Ivory came over and forcefully drew Blaze's attention away from me, saying, "Just one kiss. You won't refuse me, will you?" The gaze that had been on me quickly disappeared. Blaze glanced at Noctis and sneered. "Whatever. It's like getting bitten by a dog." He was still pretending at this moment. Ivory's face turned pale. She grabbed his neck and kissed him. They quickly completed the punishment, their lips touching very lightly and quickly. But I noticed that when they were about to separate, Ivory bit him. It was so disgusting. Others were clapping and shouting, "Awesome." Some even gave me a thumbs up and said, "Sister, you're so cool. You have such a big heart." Was it big? I'll show you something even bigger later. After the kiss, Blaze took a tissue, wiped his lips, leaned closer to me, and coaxed, "Baby, don't be angry. It's just a game. We can't be the ones who can't take it." It was ridiculous. I pushed him away. Just then, what out a la soy? The bottle stopped in front of me. "Hey, sister. Draw a card." I reached out my hand, randomly drew a card from the box, and opened it. Before I could even see it clearly, Blaze, who was more concerned than me, took it and his expression relaxed. He threw the card aside, leaned back on the sofa, and laughed triumphantly, saying, "Choose an opposite-sex person present to kiss. Come on. Blaze. Are you already showing off your love? Blaze is really lucky today. Kissing two beautiful girls in a row. Can you speak properly?" "Sister. He's drunk. Don't take it too hard. Then just kiss. We haven't seen you to kiss yet." Everyone was cheering. They almost assumed that I would choose Blaze. And even Blaze was looking at me expectantly. I didn't say anything. I just turned my head and looked at Ivory. She had lost her previous complacency. Her brows were furrowed, and her face was a bit pale. She looked at Blaze with an uneasy expression, under everyone's expectant eyes. I smiled. My expression was still gentle as I asked softly, "Can I choose anyone?" After asking, I raised my finger and started counting from the first boy sitting opposite. Soldier. General. Whoever I point to, that's the one. My finger passed over one person after another, and the people being pointed at stared blankly at my finger. My finger stopped in front of Noctis. I could feel that they all gasped. Several people's expressions changed, and even Ivory's expression became panicked. This expression seemed even more unacceptable than if I had kissed Blaze. I suddenly became a bit curious. Who exactly did Ivory love? But it had nothing to do with me. I reached out and poked Noctis. He turned his head, his eyes cool, and his emotions hidden in his dark eyes. Indistinguishable. I pretended to be free and easy, but in fact, I was extremely nervous. I said, "So it's a kiss. I choose him." There was a deathly silence, heavy and solidified. Blaze picked up the wine on the table, drank 3 cups in a row, and turned the cup upside down. Not a single drop of wine dripped out. He looked at Noctis and said, "I'll drink this wine on Celeste's behalf. Consider the extra as an apology. She's drunk. Don't take it too hard." I looked at Noctis. He slowly lit a cigarette, turned his head, looked at me, and suddenly laughed softly. He asked, "Are you drunk?" "No. I'm quite sober." "That's enough. Surprisingly, it was Ivory who couldn't hold her temper first. She furrowed her brows, and her shrill voice scolded. Blaze, can't you control your girlfriend? What kind of place is this? How dare she act so recklessly? I looked at Ivory, raised my eyebrows, and thought she was really like a clown. I retorted. It's just a game. Why can't you take it? Sister? You. Sorry. Sister. I'll borrow your boyfriend for a moment. Are you crazy? Celeste? Blaze grabbed my arm, gritted his teeth, and whispered in my ear. I know you're angry. But don't go too far. Get up. I'll take you back. I wasn't as strong as him, and I was forced to stand up. But soon, a force pulled me back down. The large hand that had been playing with the wine glass just now grabbed my wrist. As I expected, it was very powerful. With a slight pull, he pulled me back onto the sofa. Noctis raised his eyes, his gaze icy, making people not dare to resist. He said slowly to Blaze, "What's the rush? The game isn't over yet." Blaze also had a temper. After holding it in for a whole night, it finally erupted on me. The game is over. Didn't I just drink for her? Really? Noctis's expression was indifferent. He looked at me infuriately and asked, "Do you need him to drink for you?" No. I didn't look up at Blaze. I thought he was disgusting. Noctis flicked away the cigarette butt, grabbed my wrist again, and with a little force, pulled me into his arms. I was startled. My body wanted to resist, and my hands pushed against his chest. I heard him laugh softly, his eyes cold. He said, "Didn't you say you were going to kiss me? Why do I have to take the initiative?" Soft. That was the only feeling I had. Noctis's lips were so soft, like jelly, completely different from his overall demeanor. As soon as I touched them, I wanted to pull back, but a force held my waist. I could hardly sit still, completely falling into the dream net woven with the scent of snow pine. He considerately put his arm around my waist and lowered his head. There was an even stronger sense of oppression. My scalp tingled. I couldn't sit still. It was a long time before I could breathe fresh air. This was my first kiss. I was kissed until my eyes were filled with tears. And my lipstick was all smeared. Noctis's lips were also a mess. He raised his hand, wiped the lipstick off his lips with his right thumb, looked at me, his gaze deep, and said in a low and hoarse voice, "You're welcome." The next time I saw them was half a month later. Ivory was right about one thing. This really wasn't a place where I could act recklessly. Without Blaze, I was just an ordinary part-time waitress. Thanks to Blaze, I hadn't been having an easy time recently. My colleagues at the club all thought that I had tried to latch onto a rich second-generation guy and got dumped. They mocked me both openly and subtly. Some people just don't know their place. Poor little girl. Yet she dreams of being a rich lady. It's really embarrassing. She'd be better off getting a plastic surgery. With such an unappealing face. Who is she competing with? Come on. Don't be so harsh. They laughed loudly while looking at me. I didn't care. Because the people at school had said much worse things. Blaze and Ivory had made up. The once golden couple got back together. Naturally, as the only one who had dated Blaze, I was pulled out for comparison. In the end, everyone came to the conclusion. In terms of family background, appearance, and personality, I was no match for Ivory. It could even be said that I was far behind her. Maybe because I had been scolded so much these past 2 days. I actually had auditory hallucinations and heard Ivory's voice. "Waitress. Hey. Yes. I'm calling you. Come here." Oh, Evan. So it wasn't a hallucination. I turned around and saw Ivory standing at the door of the private room, waving at me. When she saw it was me, she was clearly taken aback. Then she quickly put on a mocking smile and said, "What are you doing here? Why aren't you coming over?" Just then, Blaze came out. When he saw me, he was also startled. His expression was embarrassed and ashamed. Really ugly. Ivory crossed her arms and looked at him, sneering. "After breaking up with me, your taste has dropped so much that you can even fancy a waitress?" Blaze gave her a white look and retorted, "You have good taste? Does he even care about you?" Ivory's expression turned a bit ugly. Since Blaze had made her angry, she took it out on me and asked me to pour her a cup of warm water. I fetched more than a dozen cups. One moment she said it was too hot. Then too cold. And then too tasteless. Everyone in the private room watched her make a fool of me. And no one stood up for me. Some were playing Mahjong. Some were shaking dice. I was just an unimportant, invisible person. Including Blaze. The one who once said he liked me. Is this the service attitude here? You can't even pour a cup of hot water properly. Call your manager over. Ivory called the manager over. In front of them. The manager scolded me, pressed my back, and forced me to bow to her and put on a fake smile. How I wanted to resist. But I couldn't. I had no money and couldn't afford to lose this job. Ivory looked at me triumphantly, lying back on the sofa, and said, "Just saying sorry is enough?" I looked back at her, my gaze cold and calm as I asked, "So what else do you want? How do you talk to the guest?" The manager hit me hard on the back. It hurt. A burning pain. She bowed and scraped, asking Ivory, "Ivory, what do you think?" Ivory picked up the thermos and poured a large cup of boiling hot water, which was steaming. She pushed the cup in front of me and said with a smile, "Drink it. Or kneel down and beg me. You choose." I had no choice. I looked at the cup of hot water, really wanting to pick it up and throw it in her face. But if I did that, I would have worked for nothing this whole month. Just endure for one more day. Once I get my salary, I'll quit. I picked up the cup of hot water. As soon as I touched the glass wall, my hand shook from the heat, but I still held it up. It was so hot that I could barely hold it. I could only put the cup on the table, lower my head, and drink like this. Like a dog. Finally, heading fulfilledly. Blaze couldn't stand it anymore and said, "That's enough. Isn't it? Is it fun to torment her like this? Are you feeling sorry for her?" Blaze glanced at me, then didn't say anything else. He walked past me and left the private room, slamming the door behind him. The sound was so loud that the few people playing stopped and fell silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on me. I closed my eyes. Just as I was about to drink the water, I heard the creak of the door opening. Someone grabbed my hand from behind and pulled me up. The familiar scent of cedar wafted to my nose. I looked up and saw Noctis back. Why was he here? Boss? The manager looked flustered. Even more humble than when she was facing Ivory just now. She said, "Boss. It's all my fault for my dereliction of duty and lack of strict discipline." Which made Celeste so arrogant. "I'll fire her right away." "You're indeed derelict in your duty." Noctis interrupted her, turned around, and put on a mocking smile. His tone was as relaxed as if he was discussing the weather today. He said, "A manager who can't even protect her employees has no right to boss people around here." "What?" The manager was stunned. As if she didn't understand what he meant. Noctis looked at her coldly. At this moment, he had an aura that didn't match our age. He said, "I mean, Nwadato Laosai. You're fired." The manager panicked and tried to rush forward to say something. Two security guards came in from outside and dragged her away. Her wailing gradually faded away until it couldn't be heard. The private room became quiet again. Ivory was a bit embarrassed and started tidying her hair. She said, "I didn't hear that the boss here had changed." Noctis glanced at her and replied in the same tone, casually, "Is it that difficult to acquire a club?" Ivory was taken aback, then nodded and said, "Fine. Since you're the boss, it's easy to deal with. Noctis, your employee has made me unhappy. How are you going to compensate me?" Noctis ignored her and instead turned to look at me. His brown eyes were calm, and I even read a hint of warmth in them. He asked me, "Did you do anything wrong?" "No," I answered firmly. Noctis nodded and said, "Okay. You can go out first." Ivory got anxious and took a step forward, saying, "Noctis? What do you mean?" Noctis looked at her, with a cold smile on his lips. He said, "Didn't you hear? My employee said she didn't do anything wrong. But I said she did. Who are you?" His smile deepened. He waved his hand and called in a few more security guards. He said, My club doesn't welcome guests who bully employees. You've been permanently blacklisted. Will you leave on your own? Or should I ask you to? In the break room, Noctis handed me a cup of warm water. Thank you. My face was pale as I took the cup of water. He stood in front of me with one hand in his pocket, looking down at me. He asked inferiorly, "Weren't you quite brave that night? Why are you so cowardly today?" "Because I'm poor," I answered frankly. He let out a light laugh, as if he had heard something funny. He said, "You're not afraid of offending me. But you're afraid of offending Ivory?" His tone made me seem like an idiot. I was confused and asked, "Did I offend you?" If he was referring to that kiss. "Seems like you were more proactive than me." Noctis was stunned again. He looked at me meaningfully and said, "Fine, heading fulfilled my obsession. You're something. You're only brave enough to talk back to your boss." Oh no, no. I had forgotten that he was my boss. I immediately put down the cup, stood up, lowered my chin slightly, and said respectfully, "Boss, I was wrong." Noctis raised his chin, looked at me unhurriedly, and his tone was upbeat, sounding in a good mood. He asked, "What were you wrong about?" "I shouldn't have kissed the boss forcefully. And I shouldn't have talked back to the boss." "I'm sorry. You won't deduct my salary, will you?" I looked up, and a hint of stupidity showed in my clear eyes. Noctis stared at me for a while, and gave an inexplicable smile and said, "Celeste, you're really interesting." To me, this sentence sounded like, "Woman, like, you've successfully caught my attention." I smiled helplessly and heard him ask me, "Do you need money badly?" I nodded and answered honestly, "Very much." He thought for 3 seconds and then asked me, "Can you play Machhorn?" "Huh?" Answer, "A little." Noctis nodded and said, "Fine. Come with me to a place." It was a club even bigger than the Platinum Club. There were 3 people waiting in the private room, sitting by the Machhorn table. When they saw us come in, one of them wearing a tank suit laughed and teased, "I heard Noctis went to save a beauty in distress? This must be the little beauty Noctis saved. No wonder you're late. If I were you, I'd just stand you guys up." They said one sentence after another. I felt a bit shy and lowered my head. Noctis pulled out a chair for me and let me sit down. And he sat down beside me unhurriedly, gave them a cold glance, and said, "Too talkative." The man in the tang suit laughed, not at all intimidated by him. He even said, "Rare to see Noctis being shy?" He leaned over with a cigarette in his mouth, offered one to Noctis, and held the lighter to his lips. Noctis bit the cigarette butt, looking calm, and exhaled bluish-white smoke. All 4 of them were smoking. The room was filled with thick smoke. It was choking. I coughed twice. Noctis turned his head, his brown eyes fixed on me, and asked, "Can't stand it?" "A little. It's okay." Noctis slightly lowered his eyes, looked at my blushing face from coughing, and crushed the cigarette in the gray ashtray. He raised his hand and waved away the bluish-white smoke in front of him, and said slowly, "Stop smoking." The volume was neither too loud nor too soft, just enough for the 3 people to hear. "Noctis quit smoking?" Noctis gave a cold glance and said slowly, "The little girl can't stand the smell of cigarettes." I was the only little girl present. The 3 people's inquisitive gazes fell on my face. They said, "So the rumors are true. Noctis really went to save a beauty in distress. What's your name, girl? How did you win him over? Teach us some tricks." They said one after another, and my ears turned red from shyness. Only Noctis looked calm, as if he was naturally such a gentleman. No matter who was sitting here today, he would have come to the rescue. I knew very well that I wasn't the most special one. A person as high and mighty as him would never stop for me. I've always been very self-aware. After that, Noctis often asked me to play Machhorn with him. Actually, I'm not very good at playing Machhorn. I was always losing and a bit scared. He noticed my nervousness and whispered in my ear, "If you lose, it's on me. If you win, it's yours." Was there really such a good thing? I looked at him, worried that he overestimated my ability, and asked, "Can I lose as much as I want?" Noctis was amused by me. He bent over the table, laughing so hard that he couldn't straighten up. He half raised his head, his eyes bright, and said to me, "How much could you possibly lose?" Well, that was hard to say. However, Noctis didn't let me lose for long. Several times, when I was about to play a card, he would hold down my hand, casually push out a card, and say, "Play this one." Every time, he could turn the game around and make me win. The other 3 people couldn't stand it and said, "Hey, why are you getting outside help? That's right. No playing as a couple. Get down." Noctis had to shrug and obediently sit aside, looking at me innocently, meaning that he couldn't help me anymore. And I really lived up to expectations. At first, I lost everything. But later I won so much that they shouted they wouldn't play anymore. "What's going on? Noctis? Did you bring a genius? Sister-in-law, were you playing dumb to win? That you don't play dumb to win. How can you win Noctis's heart? That makes sense. Consider this money as our wedding gift." They kept calling me sister-in-law. At first, it was just a joke. But later they seemed to be getting more and more serious. At first, I would clarify our relationship. But later, seeing that Noctis didn't care, I just let it go. Anyway, having fulfilled my obsession, I was the one who benefited. Today's Mahjong game ended quickly because they had something urgent to go back and deal with. After the game, Noctis saw them off, and the private room became quiet again. Noctis sat next to me, idly fiddling with the Mahjong tiles with his fingers, and asked me, "Going back to do your homework?" "What?" Noctis picked up a Mahjong tile with 2 fingers and said, "This." He actually noticed. I had indeed been studying hard, staying up late, buying several books, and watching live Mahjong games in the live streaming room whenever I had time. I shook my head and said, "No. I'm just gifted." He was amused by me again. I noticed that he liked to laugh a lot recently. "Is it that funny?" I asked him. And then admitted, "Okay. Fine. I did study a bit. I was afraid of losing your money. What if you went bankrupt? Who would pay me then? If I go bankrupt, you'll ignore me?" Noctis raised his head, looking at me half seriously and half jokingly, and said, "Our Celeste is really cold-blooded and heartless." I felt a bit embarrassed being stared at by him and said, "Oh, you won't go bankrupt?" Noctis raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why? You're so good-looking. God won't make you sad." He looked at me, as if thinking about something. After a while, he asked, "Then will you make me sad?" "What?" I suspected I had misheard. He shook his head and said, "It's nothing. Get up. I'll take you back to school." 77 As we were approaching the school gate, I said to Noctis, "You can just drop me off here. I'll go in by myself." It was always like this. The first time I made this request, he stopped the car, turned to look at me, and seemed a bit angry. He asked, "Is it that embarrassing to be with me?" "No." I shook my head. "On the contrary, it's too unembarrassing. So I can't be seen by others." Noctis didn't understand what I meant. But every time he still dropped me off at a place far from the school gate. But today, he didn't listen to me, and parked the car at the school gate. The yellow Ferrari parked at the school gate was recognizable to the whole school. I didn't dare to get out of the car at all, shrinking into the passenger seat, afraid of being seen by others. I asked, "Why did you park here?" "I feel like it." He seemed to think of something and suddenly asked me, "I heard someone's been chasing you recently." "Who?" I had no idea. Noctis touched the bridge of his nose with his index finger, looking a bit unnatural, and said, "Someone from the basketball team?" Oh, no. He just came to borrow my homework." As I spoke, I observed the surroundings, afraid that someone would notice us. But in reality, it was very likely that everyone was already paying attention. Oh, I have a game tomorrow. Come and watch." "What game?" I hadn't heard him mention it. Noctis looked at me, smiled, and he looked really good-looking. He said, "A basketball game. Come and bring me water." I refused without even thinking. No way. Absolutely impossible. This was like being a sitting duck. Noctis seemed to have expected my refusal. He looked at me unhurriedly, with a confident smile on his lips, and said, "Bring water. Or get out of the car here. You choose." "You rascal." He actually dared to threaten me. I answered spineless lie. "Bring water." "But I'm only bringing water. I'm definitely not doing anything else." Noctis had a playful expression, and teased me. "What else do you want to do?" His tone was long drawn out, and he rose to the tips of my ears. I turned my eyes away, not daring to look at him, and said, "Hurry up and drive. I want to get away from this place full of trouble." Back in the dormitory, my roommate pulled me and said, "Celeste, have you heard? The campus heartthrob has a girlfriend." "Oh?" I really hadn't heard about this. Look. He came by car today. And there was a girl sitting in the passenger seat. Everyone's guessing it's his girlfriend. And they all say it's Ivory." "Ivory?" I took her phone and looked at the secretly taken photo. Fortunately, hadn't fulfilled what I'd say. No one took a picture of my face. But why did they think it was Ivory? Don't you know? They had something going on before. But later Ivory got back together with Blaze. Oh, Ivory's taste is really hard to understand. Why would she choose Blaze? Anyone would choose Noctis. Right. Ah. My roommate obviously forgot that I had dated Blaze before. She covered her mouth, realizing she had said the wrong thing, and said, "Celeste, I didn't mean that." "It's okay." I gave a hearty laugh and said, "I think you're right." "Right? Right?" Seeing that I had completely let go, my roommate was relieved and started discussing the gossip with me again. "So, do you think it's Ivory?" I shook my head, looking mysterious, and said, "I don't think so." "That's right. I don't think so either." "And who do you think it is? Is it the beauty of the English department who confessed to him before? Or the freshman beauty female junior? I don't know." I shook my head again, flattering myself, and said, "It should be a peerless beauty." Needless to say, my roommate gave me a look and said, "Of course it has to be a peerless beauty. Otherwise, how could she be worthy of him?" I touched my face in front of the mirror. A peerless beauty. Was that a bit of an exaggeration? I didn't want to bring water to Noctis alone. So I came up with a brilliant idea. I bought 2 boxes of water and carried them to the basketball court. During the halftime break, I distributed the water one by one. When I got to Noctis, I smiled at him and said, "Here you are." He had a bad expression on his face and took it. From his eyes, I could tell what he meant. That he would settle accounts with me later. Several people from the basketball team happened to come over. Yo, sister-in-law is here to bring us water." "Sister-in-law." Brother Chow went to wash his face. Wait for him to come back. I looked at Noctis, and his expression became even uglier. I quickly said, I'm not. I'm just here to bring water. I don't mean anything else." "Sister-in-law. We understand. Don't be shy." That's right. The more I tried to explain, the worse it got. Noctis died and the cap of the mineral water bottle, threw the half-drunk bottle on the ground, and left without paying any attention to me. In the second half, his performance was very aggressive. He rushed and shot fiercely, making me extremely nervous. He had several intense physical collisions with the basketball team captain. Finally, heading to Feldway and say, he provoked the team captain's anger. When he jumped up to shoot, he was knocked to the ground. My heart skipped a beat. Not just me. The hearts of all the girls in the audience skipped a beat. Noctis stood up, but I noticed that his right foot was a bit unsteady. What I could notice, the team captain could of course also observe. He kept targeting Noctis's right foot. Soon, let out a low sigh. Noctis's teammates called a timeout and asked him to come off the court. His teammates were the same guys who had played Motorn with me before. They seemed to have an argument. Noctis insisted on playing, and no one could persuade him. Jasper, the boy who liked to wear a tang suit, swept his gaze across the whole audience and then fixed it on me. He ran towards me. I was stunned, just watching him run towards me, forgetting to dodge. So, in front of everyone, he said to me, Sister-in-law. Please persuade Noctis. He insists on playing. And we can't persuade him. Sister-in-law. Sis-ter-in-law. I could feel the gazes of the people around me, and their whispers. But I didn't care about that anymore because I saw Noctis stand up and limp back onto the court. At that moment, all the concerns about being scolded, targeted, or noticed were thrown to the back of my mind. I pushed through the crowd and ran towards him. Seeing me running towards him, Noctis was taken aback. He said self-deprecating lie. Finally willing to pay attention to me? I didn't have the mood to joke with him. I grabbed him and said, "You sprained your ankle. You can't play anymore." I originally thought I would have to argue with him. But I didn't expect that. Noctis stared at me for a few seconds. Then nodded and said, "Okay." And just walked off the court like that. Was it that simple? I followed him, still feeling a bit incredulous. In the second half, I just sat next to him, feeling the resentment of all the girls in the audience. Noctis, however, was in a very good mood and even had the time to hum a song. Without him, everyone seemed to lose the motivation to play, and the game was lost without a doubt. But he wasn't angry at all. He even shook hands with the team captain amicably. The team captain's gaze was on me. And he said, "Celeste." Noctis just blocked his line of sight and said, "You played well. Let's have a rematch sometime." The team captain was taken aback, then smiled understandingly and said, "You're not bad either. Take good care of your injury. I'm sorry about today. It doesn't matter. I always have to give the loser some compensation." What nonsense was he talking about? Obviously, it was his team that lost the game. I accompanied Noctis home. His private doctor examined him and said it was nothing serious. Just needed to put on some plasters. But he kept saying it hurt. I was very worried and asked the doctor, "Should we go for another checkup? I'm afraid he hurt his bones." The doctor glanced at him and said, "If he hurt his bones, he wouldn't be able to walk. You're playing the sympathy card, kid." Noctis lay on the sofa and said, "If there's nothing else, get out. Don't bother me." "Fine," let out a low sigh. "I won't disturb your lovey-dovey time." I saw the doctor out and kept looking at my phone with a serious expression. Noctis nudged me and said, "I'm thirsty. Go get me some water." "Oh." I got up, poured him a glass of water, and then continued to browse my phone. Noctis finally got annoyed. With limited patience, he asked me, "What are you looking at?" "Eavesdropping on gossip." "What kind of gossip?" I looked up, with a face of resignation, and said, "The gossip about us. Tell me in detail." I threw my phone to him. The confession wall was full of photos of us. Going viral. The rumors were becoming increasingly outrageous. Some said that we were together to get revenge on Ivory and Blaze. This was pure nonsense. Noctis lazily swiped through the phone a few times. Apparently, he wasn't interested in these people. He threw the phone back to me and asked, "How do you plan to respond?" How did he know I would respond? I thought for a while and said, "I plan to say that you're my boss. And we have a pure superior-subordinate relationship. There's absolutely no personal affection involved." I thought my clarification was quite appropriate. Unexpectedly, having fulfilled my assertion, Noctis' smile froze on his face. And he slowly repeated what I said. "No personal affection? A pure superior-subordinate relationship?" I had a bad feeling. Sure enough, I saw his eyes turn cold, his smile disappear, and he said sarcastically, "Celeste, do you think I'm an idiot?" What did he mean? Do you think just anyone can be called sister-in-law by them? Guess why I was so idle as to compete with that muscle-brained fool? Why do you think I took you to play Mahjong to make money? Do I really love playing Mahjong? Especially in a game where each point is worth 500 yuan? Celeste, are you stupid or am I? I was the stupid one. Noctis' way of confessing was so straightforward. Seeing that I didn't respond for a long time, he kicked me out. He didn't contact me for half a month. I wanted to go to work, but the newly replaced manager told me that the boss didn't allow me to work anymore. This was cutting off my source of income. I felt a bit sad. I opened my phone and found that the confession wall was still gossiping about us. It had been half a month. Hadn't any new gossip emerged? Coincidentally, Ivory also responded. She posted a very tea-like, scheming status, meaning that Noctis was a nice person. But she was going to get engaged to Blaze. The photo showed the engagement rings of the two of them. Now everyone was calling Noctis a lapdog. What's the use of being handsome? He still can't win the goddess's heart. Guys. Even Noctis can be a lapdog. Why don't you quickly dump your ex-boyfriend who doesn't reply to you in a timely manner? No wonder he took a fancy to Celeste. They're really like the Avengers. Noctis is so low class. I thought he was some unattainable person before. But he's just so-so. Deceiving the feelings of an innocent female college student for another woman. Truly worthy of you. The campus heartthrob. Come to think of it. Isn't Noctis a male mistress? So disgusting. I could accept them scolding me. But I couldn't accept them scolding Noctis. Since Ivory wasn't being decent. Don't blame me. I used my main account to start criticizing. I found the confession wall and said, "Are you there? I want to expose something." Not anonymously. That night, a video was posted on the confession wall. It was a video of Ivory and Blaze passionately kissing on the terrace. This is a video from Blaze's birthday. It's clear to see who the mistress really is. Justice will prevail. After the video was posted, it didn't cause much of a stir. Some people said that Ivory was the mistress in my relationship with Blaze. And such an ex-lover and first love was really disgusting. Others said that they were originally in love and couldn't control themselves. And that I was being too self-righteous. Anyway, headings of failed my obsession. They wouldn't scold Noctis anymore. I felt relieved. However, when I woke up, the world had changed again. Noctis also responded, even more radically. He directly mentioned Ivory and said, "Who's the one licking him? Don't you have a clue?" Ivory completely shut up. A few hours later, she cancelled her account. I went to that luxurious club. Only then did I know that Noctis hadn't been there for many days. The waiter took me to the private room. Looking at the empty Modhorn table, I suddenly felt a bit sentimental for some reason. Actually, I had known Noctis for a long time. He had saved me once before. One day when I was working as a waitress, a drunk customer tried to take advantage of me. And he stood up. His tone was very cold at that time. And he didn't even look at me more than once. But even so, he still stepped in to save me. I had never thought that one day he would like me. But I didn't think I was worthy of him. I had no father since I was a child. A few years ago, in an accident, my mother became a vegetable. I had to earn money to take care of her and didn't want to burden him. I was still lost in thought when the hospital called me and said, "Blaze, your mother is going to be transferred to another hospital today. What time are you available to come over?" My mother is being transferred to another hospital? When did this happen? Why didn't I know? You didn't know? Then come to the hospital. We'll talk face to face. I quickly went to the hospital. Waiting there was also Noctis, whom I hadn't seen for half a month. When I saw him, I stopped in my tracks, not daring to move forward. Did he already know? How much did he know? When he saw me, Noctis also seemed a bit unnatural. He said, "I found a better nursing home. It's more suitable for Auntie than here. There are professional nurses. And the environment is good. I'll pay for it. You can consider it a loan from me. Pay me back when you have money in the future. Here are the transfer procedures. Take a look. Sign it if there's no problem." The nursing home that Noctis found for my mother was the best one. I had also dreamed of transferring my mother there. But it was just a dream that was hard to come true. But I didn't expect this dream to come true so soon. I signed the transfer procedures and also wrote him an IOU. Saying, "You fill in the amount. I won't complain." Noctis didn't even look at the IOU. He casually put it in his pocket, looked at me, and asked, "Why did you post that video? Aren't you someone who hates being in the spotlight the most?" Well, I didn't want to see them scold you either. So what if they scold me? You don't like me anyway. What does it have to do with you? Who said I don't like you? We were both stunned. I was stunned because of what I said. And he was stunned because of my admission. You're finally willing to admit it? What? My face turned red. and I turned my head away, not looking at him. The next second, I was hugged into his arms. The pleasant scent of cedar filled my nose. He said, "But in such matters, a man should take the initiative. Celeste, I like you." I was once again caught in the dream web he wove. Being Noctis' girlfriend is very happy. But he gets jealous easily. He kisses and hugs me at every turn, and asks me if Blaze treated me the same way. I couldn't bear it anymore and told him. That was my first kiss. He was stunned. His face also turned red, and he lowered his head and said, "Me too." Shocking. The campus heartthrob had never been in a relationship. I asked him again, "Why didn't you let me go to work before?" He held me in his arms and said lazily, "You're my boss's wife. Do they deserve to have you work there?" Only then did I realize that ever since Noctis asked me to play Maughorn, he had been finding various reasons to prevent me from going to work. But he still paid my salary. At that time, I just thought he was rich and stupid. But I didn't expect he had thought so far ahead. I secretly smiled and said, "So you've liked me for a long time, huh?" His ears turned red. He didn't say anything, but just came up to kiss me again. It was even more intense than that night. Blaze was going abroad with Ivory. Before leaving, he came to see me. Noctis and I went to meet him together. He looked at us and said, "Celeste, I'm sorry for what happened before. I'm really sorry to you." I interrupted him before he could finish and said, "It's okay. I also did something wrong. You can go." Blaze didn't expect me to be so easygoing. He was stunned, looked at me, and then at Noctis, and said, "Can Noctis be magnanimous and let us off?" I was stunned and turned to look at Noctis. He looked at me expressionlessly, and I couldn't tell what he was thinking. "What did you do again?" Noctis raised his chin, looked at Blaze, and said lazily, "Helping the weak." Blaze, who was called weak, got angry. He slapped the table and said, "If it weren't for you, we wouldn't be like this today." Noctis' tone was indifferent, still as relaxed as if he was discussing the weather. He replied, "That's why I said you're the weak. Besides me, who else would be willing to acquire you?" Blaze couldn't argue with him. He could only turn to me again and say, "Celeste, do you see? He's such a cold-blooded person. I advise you to think carefully and don't be deceived by him." Only then did Noctis get serious. He narrowed his eyes, and it was obvious that he was angry. He said coldly to Blaze, "If you don't want to end up worse, get out of here." Blaze laughed. Noctis fell silent. I hugged him, squeezed his hand to soothe him, and asked, "Are you angry?" He shouldn't have tried to sow discord. "What are you angry about?" "He won't succeed." Noctis looked down at me, his chin resting on my head, and he hugged me tightly. His hostility subsided a lot. He said lazily, "Yeah. Celeste, don't leave me." This was Noctis. Even when saying love words, he still looked like someone owed him. But I just fell for him. Perhaps from the moment he reached out to help me, I was destined to fall into the love net he wove. I hugged him tightly, took in the scent of cedar on him, and said, "I'll never leave." The sun was shining brightly outside the window, shining on us, making us feel warm. Finally, heading southwardly, my wish came true. Extra Celeste had a secret. This secret was still discovered by Noctis on their wedding day. When she was tidying up things, a diary accidentally fell out. In the interleaver of the diary, there was a photo of Noctis. It was a photo that was once posted on the school bulletin board. That photo was only posted for one day and then was stolen. No one knew that the thief was Celeste. Noctis picked up the photo, squinted his eyes and thought for a moment, and said, "If I remember correctly, at this time, we didn't know each other yet. It was he who didn't know her. But she had known him for a long time." Celeste's heart was beating fast. Noctis sat down beside her, hugged her, and asked, "Can I read it?" She nodded, her voice a bit shaky, and said, "Go ahead." He opened the notebook, and also opened the secret she had buried for a long time. 2.14 For the first time, someone was willing to help me. 2.15 How can I get close to him? 3.9 I came up with a brilliant idea. 6.6 So he's not Blaze's friend. I misunderstood. I should have ignored Blaze earlier. The good news is that he went into the wrong private room. I kissed him. This was my first kiss. 8.9 He seems to like me. 9.9 He does like me. He agreed to be my boyfriend. It turned out that everything was her long-planned scheme. The end of the full text.